Hello again, everybody. I got a couple more lenses for you. Nikon Series E lenses. And if you want to know more about the Series E lenses, you can look at my video that I uploaded a few days ago on the Nikon 28mm Series E lens. Now both of these lenses they had about the same production run they were introduced in. According to the research I've done, they were introduced in 1981 and discontinued in 85, which is about the time that all the Series E lenses were discontinued. And since they were later releases, there is no early versions of these lenses where the chrome ring was. The early versions didn't have this chrome ring. They had the black plastic ring. On the early ones that came out, like the 50mm and the 100mm, and maybe a couple of other ones, but they had two versions of those lenses. The early version had the black plastic ring, and the later versions had the chrome ring. But since these were introduced later, this version you see here is the only versions of these two lenses. So now I'm going to talk about these lenses one at a time. First up is the 36 to 72. Now the 36 to 72 on my scale, it weighs in at about 390 grams, so it's not too heavy for a nice zoom lens. And there's the Nikon 50 1.8D lens next to it for comparison. So it's not too big, not too heavy for a wide angle telephoto zoom lens. Now back then, that was before the wide angle craze hit, the super wide angle craze hit. So most of the zoom lens back then started at 35mm, like a 35 to 70, 35 to 105, and so on. So this 36 to 72 was pretty common back then. Back in those days, if you wanted to go really wide, you just threw on a 28 or 24mm prime lens. And this lens it's got a maximum aperture of 3.5 and a minimum aperture of 22. Now, something you'll see with both of these lenses, they're a constant aperture throughout their zoom range, which is nice. Nowadays you got to pay a fortune for a zoom lens with a constant aperture. They've gotten away from that. Back then it was the norm. Almost all zooms were constant aperture, but that's not the case today. And it uses 52mm filters. There's the front of it. Back then, 52mm filters were very common with Nikon lenses. That's not so today, because lenses seem to have grown a lot since then. Nowadays it's 67, 72, 77. And it is a push-pull zoom. Back then, most zoom lenses were push-pull. And a lot of them push-pull lenses, over time they would get really loose and develop zoom creep. Like I'll show you, my 70 to 210 suffers from that. I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you how I fixed it. Now here's the 70 to 210 lens. It's got a maximum aperture of 4, and a minimum aperture it stops down to 32. It's a pretty big lens, which is about the average size of a 70 to 200 or 70 to 210 back in those days. It's got a bigger filter grid. It uses 62mm filters, another size that used to be common with Nikon lenses. And it's also a push-pull lens. It has this one ring, you turn it to focus and then push or pull to zoom. That's 70 and this is 210. Now if you notice that this one has a macro mode, it only works at 70mm. There we go. If you are not at 70, your minimum focus distance is about 5 feet. It stops there. But if you can pull it to 70, you can go down, take it down to about 2 feet for macro mode. But the kicker is, I think I can get a tighter crop by going to 210 and going to 5 feet on the focus with a lot more working distance. So I guess it would be handy if you needed to get close to the subject and couldn't back up, didn't have much room to back up. You could put it to 70 and then go into macro mode. I guess that was the logic behind that. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to tell you how I fixed the zoom creep. This lens was very loose. I mean, you could just put it up like this and the zoom would just fall. Well, it's in macro mode, I think. Let's see. There we go. You could set it up like this and it would just fall. If you had the lens on a tripod, if you tilted it up or down, it would creep. So what I did is I have got some clear vinyl, pretty thin stuff. If it's too thick, it won't work. And I don't know how well you can see that. I put a piece of clear vinyl along the barrel here and here, and that stiffened it up quite a bit. Now it stays where you put it, and also it tightened up the focus a little bit. It's got a nice damp feeling to the focus, and it was a little bit too loose, but that was a common thing back in the old push-pull zoom days for a zoom to develop creep after a while, after a lot of use. Now here's the 36 to 72 with its dedicated lens hood. I found this hood. I forgot where I found it, on KEH Camera or eBay. I bought it after I bought the lens. When I bought the lens, it didn't come with it. It's the Nikon HK8 dedicated lens hood. You just loosen the screw here, and it just slips onto this part of the barrel, the focus part of the focus zoom ring. This part. See, you just put it on there and tighten that little set screw. Now I don't know which dedicated hood goes with the 70 to 210. I never looked it up because on a telephoto lens it really doesn't matter. You can use just about any generic screw-on hood because there's no problem. You have no problems with vignetting with a telephoto as long as it's not too long. So I just use a screw-in hood with the 70 to 210. Now we get to the good part. You're probably wondering about image quality with these two lenses. Well, first of all, I'll tell you that the Nikon Series E lenses were not quite up to par with the Nikon lenses, and in the price range that they were sold at, you couldn't really expect that. But about the 36 to 72, this is the second one I had. The first one I had, it was pretty well worn, pretty well beat up. I got it at a good price, and it was terrible, especially wide open at 72 millimeters. I mean, it was just unusable. It looked like you were shooting through a fog. Colors, contrast, sharpness was just awful. So then I wanted to see if all 36 to 72s were like that, or if it was just that one. So I found this one here in much better condition, and it does better. It's now wide open, at wide open aperture, it's a lacking in sharpness, but the colors and contrasts are still decent wide open. It's, like I said, it's a lot better than the other one. But if you stop it down to 5.6, it gets a lot better. It gets pretty good actually. And as far as image quality on the 70 to 210, it's decent. I mean, the colors, contrasts are decent. Sharpness is, I say sharpness is okay, but certainly not up to par with the high dollar lenses or most of the modern lenses. But the problem I have with the 70 to 210 is purple fringing at large aperture, especially f4s. A lot of purple fringing in high contrast areas, where like a black and white come together. And now most of the Nikon digital cameras nowadays, they will correct for CAs if you shoot in JPEG, which I do, but it will not correct for purple fringing. And I don't have sophisticated, I don't have the right software to correct purple fringing. So whenever I want to use that lens, I just stop down or deal with it. It's not too bad, but it is a problem.